In many ways, Minecraft is a game of parallels. There are passive villagers and the scheming illagers. There's an overworld, but also a fiery and dangerous nether. There are peaceful animals like pigs and sheep, and then there are destructive mobs like the creeper. Yet, perhaps no parallel is stranger than the one in plain sight, the difference between day and night. When the sun is out, the world exists in relative safety, but in the dark, swarms of hostile enemies approach, wanting nothing more than to attack the player. Most of these enemies are undead zombies and skeletons. They're similar in size to the player, but they're distorted, infected with some bizarre disease that destroys their flesh and changes their behavior. We can't let the fact that this is so common distract us from just how strange it is. What is this undead contagion anyways? It seems to be magical in some way, but how? Is it possible to explain such a weird Minecraft phenomenon? Welcome to Deep Dive, a series where we are exploring the secrets of Minecraft. Tonight, we're going to take a structured look at the undead who have saturated the overworld. Hopefully, through this process, we can start to put together a bit more of the complicated relationship between magic and zombies. This video will be best if you've been watching the Deep Dive series for a while, especially these videos here. If this is your first time, then I'll still explain things, just know that there might be some finer details that won't be mentioned. With that out of the way, it's almost time to get started. Join me for a dive beneath the waves. Before we dive in, we're going to take a look at this video's sponsor. A lot of us are pretty busy with school and work, and while it's good to be doing productive things, sometimes it feels like there isn't time to read. I know that I've definitely experienced this frustration. If only there was a way to enjoy books while doing other things like commuting, exercising, or traveling. And that's where today's sponsor, Audible, comes in. Audible is a place where you can listen to a huge library of books, including bestsellers and new releases. The collection is so big, in fact, that it would take more than 300 years to listen to the entire library. One title that's kept me intrigued lately is This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel J. Levitin. It offers some interpretations of how we interact with music that's definitely made me think. But Audible provides more than just audiobooks. They also have podcasts, wellness programs, theatrical performances, and comedy in their new Plus catalog. There's something for everybody. No matter where you're going or what you're doing this season, Audible will have just the right thing for your current mood. For a limited time, save 60% on your first 3 months of Audible. That's only $5.95 a month. Ready to get started? Visit audible.com/retro or text RETRO to 500-500. That's audible.com/retro or text RETRO to 500-500. Thanks so much to Audible for the sponsorship. Now, back to the video. We talk about magic a lot during the Deep Dive series, and for good reason. It's one of the parts of the Minecraft world that makes it so unique. It's connected to many aspects of the game. Seemingly wherever we go, there's something that's magical. This means that to understand certain elements in the Minecraft universe, we need to have knowledge of the underlying magic. So instead of starting with the undead plague, we're going to start by examining magic. During our journey, perhaps we'll stumble across some interesting connections to the undead. One way to deconstruct magic is to examine what we do understand and see if we can work backwards to find simple roots. Let's consider a rough magical hierarchy. Think about this as a list in order of complexity. At the very top, we have the magically produced beings, such as the Vex. These have no known existence outside of summoning, and they do not require any materials. They come out of thin air. This is the most complicated type of magic in the Minecraft universe. We only know of one mob capable of doing it, and there's no evidence that it's ever been done before. Below the Vex is the Totem of Undying. The ability to absorb one fatal blow is extremely powerful, and it too is an item only discovered by a single group. Moving down, we have the Golems. Artificial or simulated life is powerful, but it's not at the same level as Vexes since they require physical materials to construct. The Wither also exists somewhere around this area. I'm not so sure it's a Golem, but it has some similarities. As we continue to move down the ladder, we reach the Beacon. While the status effects it can produce are powerful, it's certainly not as complicated as a Golem or a Vex. Further down are golden apples and then potions. Again, some useful effects, but not to the same level as the Beacon. These status effects are temporary and are on a much smaller scale. Things are a little fuzzy down here, but enchantment is probably similar to potions. It's restricted to individual equipment and is relatively common throughout the world. Now, it may seem like we've just reached the bottom of the magic hierarchy, but we should nonetheless ask the question, is there anything less complex than potions? We have to think about it for a bit, but there does appear to be something that would fit the bill: suspicious stew. This is a food item that often flies under the radar. It's not even found in the crafting book. A player who consumes it gains one of several status effects, ranging from fire resistance to jump boost to blindness. However, the duration is very short, typically somewhere between 2 and 10 seconds. How does one make a suspicious stew? It's almost the same as mushroom stew, made with brown and red mushrooms. The difference is that suspicious stew includes an additional flower depending on the desired status effect. For example, a brown mushroom, a red mushroom, and a poppy make a suspicious stew with 4 seconds of night vision. Another possibility is combining mushrooms and azure bluette to cause temporary blindness. Let's think for a second about how similar this is to potion brewing. We are combining ingredients to produce a drinkable item that causes a status effect. Since these effects are short-lived, it seems logical to put suspicious stew lower on the hierarchy than potions. There's another similarity between the two that is easy to overlook. Both use a base and an active ingredient. In potion brewing, the active ingredient would be the gas tier, glistering melon, phantom membrane, and other similar items. In suspicious stew, the active ingredient is the flower. How about the base? In potion brewing, it's almost always a nether wart, required to make an awkward potion. Similarly, all suspicious stews need a brown and a red mushroom. There's a clear parallel between the nether wart and the mushrooms. It's as if they're serving the same purpose in both types of concoctions. There's some sort of fundamental similarity between the two. The most basic connection is that both are fungi. If we head to the nether, we'll find huge tree-like structures called huge fungi. They're made out of nether wart blocks, which is strong evidence that the nether wart is a fungus. Furthermore, mushrooms and nether warts have a visual similarity. You can just make out the cap while it grows. From this, it would seem as though mushrooms are an even less complex form of magic than suspicious stew. Potions and stew are both ultimately derived from fungus, which implies that mushrooms, netherworts, and other fungi hold a foundational place in the structure of Minecraft magic. In the past, I've discussed the idea of magical energy, perhaps in a bit too much detail. The basic concept is that magic in Minecraft doesn't just occur randomly, it always requires some type of energy. This applies to potions and suspicious stew. The effects they produce are the result of magical energy coming from somewhere. While potions do require blaze powder, that doesn't appear to be the most fundamental source of magical power. Instead, it's gotta be the nether wart. That's what provides the magical base from which more complex things can happen. Similarly, the energy in the suspicious stew is coming from the mushrooms. It's therefore logical to assume that fungus serves as a relatively dense source of magical energy. But don't take my word for it. There are others in the Minecraft universe who've discovered this. The first place to look is the cleric villagers. While the name might lead us to think that they are magical experts, in reality they don't seem to have much actual knowledge of potion brewing. Despite their brewing stands, they don't sell any true potions besides bottles of enchanting. One reason for this is they have no access to nether warts. They must have at least heard of them, since they'll gladly buy warts from the player. Unfortunately, we don't see any evidence that they know what to do once they have them. What about the witch? I've argued that witches are cleric villagers who've been outcast for tampering with the undead. In igloo basements, we can see that the witch was attempting to cure the zombie villager. Part of this included making a potion of weakness, something we never see normal clerics do. But how did the witch brew a potion without nether warts? Well, it turns out that the potion of weakness has a special recipe. It's the one potion that does not require a nether wart to brew. Instead, it uses a fermented spider eye, which contains a brown mushroom. In essence, what the witch was able to do was realize that the fabled nether warts were not necessary. Instead, mushrooms could get the job done. These mushrooms were exceedingly powerful, even able to cure the zombie disease which had long plagued the villagers. The witch had rediscovered the magical capabilities of mushrooms, especially with respect to the undead. Let's keep going with this. When the witch was banished, where did they go? To swamps, one of the few places above ground with an abundance of mushrooms. Furthermore, the witch cultivates red mushrooms in a pot on the windowsill. Presumably, they use these to brew potions in their cauldron. It would seem as though the witch understands that mushrooms are a key source of magical energy. The theme of discovering the utility of mushrooms shows up in a different place. The illagers are the group with the most complex magic, far beyond anything the witch has ever done. Yet, they too understand the importance of mushrooms. Their home base is the Woodland Mansion, an extremely rare structure that is found in the dark forest biome. Dark forests have huge mushrooms scattered about, something that is rare in other places. Furthermore, we can find mushrooms in the mansions themselves. There's a room where the illagers are clearly farming them. Is it for food? That's not likely. Mushroom stew is not found in any chests owned by the illagers. Instead, it appears that they survive on mostly bread, which is found everywhere. The prevalence of mushrooms inside and outside the woodland mansions is not a coincidence. There's a reason the illagers built their mansions here. It's the same reason for their mushroom farms. They understand that fungi are a crucial link to magical power. But it goes even deeper. Much like the witch, the illagers' experiments tend to also deal with life and death, creating artificial life, summoning life from the void, and preventing fatal blows. And all of this is coming from fungus. Something about fungus causes it to be particularly connected to life and death. But what? It's time to briefly exit Minecraft and look at mushrooms in the real world. Mushrooms are in the fungus kingdom. Unlike plants, fungi do not have chlorophyll. This means that they are unable to produce energy using light through photosynthesis. Instead, many mushrooms are saprotrophs. This means that they feed on non-living organic material, which helps break it down and recycle nutrients back into the ecosystem. In other words, some types of mushrooms grow using dead material. Now let's go back to Minecraft. It seems logical to assume that the mushrooms we find in-game work similarly to real-life mushrooms, absorbing nutrition from other sources in the environment. This occurs in the overworld. Their existence on fallen trees indicates that the Minecraft mushrooms are serving a similar role to the real-life mushrooms, decomposing the dead and using whatever energy remains. The nether wart does the same thing, although it appears at first to be more specialized since it grows on soul sand. We've talked about this before, but soul sand is a very unique block. Perhaps more than anything, it's tied to death. There appear to be screaming souls, and these can be released using the soul speed enchantment. Somehow, the soul sand is capable of absorbing energy from dead beings. For reasons I won't explain here, it has to do with the withering effect. Regardless of the details, netherworts are particularly keen to use some of this energy. Much like mushrooms, their power is derived from dead material. Yet, there's something strange going on with the warts. If we explore the nether, we find huge forests of netherworts. These are the crimson and warped forests. They're completely overrun by fungus. There are roots, sprouts, vines, shroomlights, and nylium. However, despite these forests being made of netherwort blocks, something is missing. Where's the soul sand? Didn't we just say that netherworts needed to feed upon it? As we think about it, more questions arise. Why do the forested netherworts look so different? Why do the small versions never show up? While they have the same name, something has changed in these forests. There's an interesting piece of evidence found in a Block of the Week article. Take a look at this quote. Fungi-based technology is quite often used to decontaminate polluted environments. So next time you're wandering through a particularly contaminated part of the nether and wondering why there are lots of mushrooms, you've got your answer. There's a striking word used in that quote, contaminated. Webster's dictionary defines contaminated as soiled, stained, corrupted, or infected by contact or association. The fungi in the nether are feeding off of something. It would appear as though that something is not natural, an infection or a stain that shouldn't necessarily be there. Instead of using soul sand, these netherwort forests have found another source of energy, a contamination. And when we really start to think about it, isn't a lot of the nether contaminated? For example, soul sand valleys are, in many ways, the most unnatural biome in Minecraft. Netherrack has been almost totally replaced by soul sand. As we know, soul sand is closely associated with death and the wither. Why is there so much of it in these valleys? Clearly, a lot of something died here at one point. This leads us to a bit of an unsettling question. What would have the most to gain from a lot of death? The Enderman? Doesn't seem very likely. Striders or ghasts? Nah, it wouldn't affect them. No, it's the very thing we've been talking about this whole time. Fungus. Fungus thrives on death. It absorbs nutrients from dead materials. If, for some reason, there were to be a lot of death, wouldn't it primarily benefit fungus? With that, we have the pieces in place to tell a story about what may have happened, and finally understand the undead plague. We're gonna go back in time. The ancient nether was not the same as the nether we see today. It was much more barren and generally devoid of life. Sure, some things eked out in existence. The ghasts floated around the lava pits, and blazes meandered through the wastes. There were also occasional patches of soul sand with nether warts. The soil was produced from the death of living nether beings. However, it was limited. There were relatively few things dying at any given moment, so there was not much for the netherworts to feed upon. Suddenly, a portal appeared. A curious group known as the Ancient Builders had discovered a way to teleport from the overworld to the nether. These Ancient Builders were humanoid, similar in size and shape to the player. There's a vast amount of evidence for their existence, such as the pyramids and ancient shipwrecks. I've referred to them many times in the Deep Dive series. The Builders had just stumbled across the formula for interdimensional teleportation, and for the first time, there were outsiders in the nether. It was a dangerous place, and the Ancient Builders were ill-suited for the hostile environment. Yet they explored the dimension anyways, and in doing so, discovered that the rare nether warts were powerful. When combined with materials from blazes, these warts could be used to brew magical potions. So the Builders set up permanent settlements by constructing nether fortresses. Here, they could be relatively safe while cultivating nether warts and blazes. But as often happens in real life, the introduction of foreign beings came with unintended side effects. The Ancient Builders unknowingly brought with them spores of the overworld red and brown mushrooms. And it turned out that the energy-rich environment of the nether was perfect for them. They began to pop up throughout the dimension. These were different from nether warts. They were adapted to the overworld and thus did not need soul sand to grow. Meanwhile, the Ancient Builders were becoming increasingly entrenched in the dimension. It turned out that there were a lot more useful things in the nether than they had initially realized. For example, netherite was a superior material. So superior, in fact, that they constructed huge bastion mining outposts. The transformation of pigs into piglins gave them a substantial workforce for their mining operation. Suddenly, the nether wasn't quite as devoid of life as it used to be. It was being quickly colonized by living things from another place. The result of this was that there was much more death. Builders succumbed to the heat, piglins burned in the fire, pigs fell off of ledges. The dead material began to accumulate. For the saprotrophic mushrooms, it was paradise. There was more food than ever. As a result, the amount of fungi in the nether began to increase dramatically. After all, they never needed to look far to find something dead. It was everywhere. Soul sand was becoming much more common. Now, there were entire areas of the nether that were consumed by it. With such a dense concentration of soul energy, a new beast began to spawn: withers. These were extraordinarily powerful and extremely effective at killing. They could quickly wipe out an exploring group of Ancient Builders. What happened when they died? Even more soul sand was produced. It was a snowball effect. As soul sand spread to more areas, bigger and bigger withers began to form. They became so huge and so dominant that fighting one was a monumental task for the Ancient Builders, and they were forced to avoid soul sand valleys whenever possible. However, they did realize that there was some benefit. When a builder would die, they would bury them in these valleys instead of risking the spread of sand to other places. These valleys were dangerous anyways, why not take advantage of it? But the fungus was starting to change. Thus far, we've talked about fungus being saprotrophic, feeding on dead material. However, in real life, there's another way which fungus can get its energy: parasitism. In this scheme, parasitic fungi attack beings while they are still alive. This can cause disease and other major problems for the host, but it has the distinct advantage of mobility. Furthermore, certain types of parasites also use the host for reproduction. A famous example of this is the cordyceps fungus, which has varieties that can infect insects and arthropods. In a terrifying twist, the cordyceps takes control of the host, forcing it to climb higher and higher. Then, the fruiting body of the fungus bursts from its head, spreading the spores to more victims. There's an obvious example of this type of behavior in Minecraft: mushrooms. Found exclusively in the mushroom fields biome, mushrooms are cows that have been afflicted with a parasitic fungal disease. They're so far gone that we can explicitly see the mushrooms growing on them. We also know that mushrooms are not a new species, since it's possible to remove the shrooms using shears, returning it to a normal cow. No, this is an example of fungus acting as a parasite. Mushrooms have the ability to feed off of living cows. Netherworts can feed off of dead soul sand. What if these two abilities could combine to produce a crossbreed? A new way for the fungus to thrive and reproduce. Not living, not dead, but somewhere in the middle. Undead. An undead being would have many useful traits for the fungus. It could target and attack susceptible beings, thus continuing the life cycle. But the brain would be too infected to realize what was happening and attempt to cure itself. And the best part of this entire thing? There was a whole new dimension filled with potential hosts. And these hosts had an awfully convenient habit of returning to the nether again and again. The undead disease started slowly, as novel infections usually do. The fungus affected a piglin or two. A couple of Ancient Builders contracted the disease. Yet, it wasn't long until the fungus began to completely explode in population. In Minecraft, mushrooms only grow in low light levels. The zombie fungus was no different. While it was fine during the nighttime, it was unable to survive the harsh light of day, burning up in the sun. Thus, the infected beings only emerged during the darkness. The infection spread throughout the overworld. It was so powerful that the number of ancient builders began to rapidly dwindle. While they did manage to cure the disease at one point, a critical component was gold for golden apples. There was a lot of gold in the nether, so the builders set up huge trips to bring as much gold over as possible. Yet, as they gained more life-saving gold, they brought the fungus over as well, only making the problem worse and worse. It didn't take long for there to be a mass extinction event, which ultimately killed off the species. Check out the above video if you want more information on how this happened. It's too long of a story to tell here. Suffice to say, the fungus was so effective that soon, only the infected remained. With the ancient builders gone, things began to change in the nether. The huge withers began to die off because of a lack of things to kill, leaving only their bones in the soul sand valleys. The parasitic fungus found some susceptible beings in the piglins, but they were too limited. Instead, the non-soul sand variants became the most successful fungus. Forests grew, and with them, new ecosystems developed. No longer restricted to just soul sand, the netherwort forests became the areas of the nether richest in life. Sure, there was a contamination brought forth by the ancient builders. Yet, as so often happens, life found a way to take advantage of it. This theory has a lot of moving parts, so let's take a step back to give a brief summary. Fungus is useful for many different magical purposes, which implies that it's getting its magical energy from somewhere. We also know that fungus can be saprotrophic, feeding off of dead material. This is how we see it most often in the overworld, and also with nether warts and soul sand. However, it is also possible for fungus to be parasitic. We see an explicit example of this with the mushrooms. As more and more ancient builders came to the netherwort fungus mutated with the overworld fungus and developed the ability to reproduce by converting living beings to an undead version. Thus, fungi could get the magical energy necessary for survival without needing for the host to be completely dead. This eventually spread to the overworld, and it ended up destroying the civilization of the ancient builders. As with all theories, I encourage you to think about this critically instead of taking my word for it. One possible issue is the following. If the zombie plague really is fungally based, then why don't the zombies ever totally decompose? I would once again bring up the mushrooms. It's not in the fungus's best interest to ever kill the host. Rather, it wants it to stay undead for as long as possible. That's why zombies attack villagers. Zombifying other beings keeps the fungus alive for longer, essentially acting as a way to reproduce. There may be some who disagree with the very premise that mushrooms are magical. You could very well interpret mushrooms eating dead material as just doing what they do in real life, without any sort of magic involved. And that certainly could be true, but considering how much magic and life force seemed intertwined, and also the magical uses of mushrooms, I felt safe enough taking the leap here. Still, this is a point which could defeat the theory if you disagree. So, there we have it. That's my theory. The interaction between the various magical entities is very complex. It's something where we need to think about the game as a whole, while also focusing on the details. In this video, we took evidence from several locations to understand what's happening. I want to ask you, does this theory make sense to you? Did I miss something? Am I totally incorrect? The main purpose of this video is to get a discussion going. With enough people thinking about it, we can surely figure out how everything works. If you think you found something, please mention it in the comments below. You can also post it on the RGN subreddit, or come over to the Discord server. We've had some really cool conversations, and I'd love to hear your voice. We will go ahead and end with that. This has been RetroGamingNow. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day.